And that's what a lot of people are looking for. It's like, yeah, life is work. It's hard work, but it doesn't mean that you have to only invoke one or two spirits and be tired as you're doing this horrible accounting work that you hate. It's like you can find something that lights you up, and the work will just, it'll be like that. It'll be your heroic mission. And kids like know that intuitively, and confused adults talk them out of it.
Welcome to the Rebel Educator podcast. On this episode, I am speaking with Taylor Foreman of Rebel Educator, and we explore the importance of storytelling, both for children's development and their understanding of the world, but also for our understanding of the education system, where it came from, what it is, and where it's going. We talk about the importance of play for kids, the intellectual development of children, and we explore what it is that we're preparing kids for anyway, and what is important in educating them to get there. I hope that you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.
I was writing an article today, right before we were talking, and I was kind of happy with the title. It's the multi-trillion-dollar race to make dreams portable. And we spend something like 6.9% of our GDP on media, on sort of like this sharing of our internal world. And we spend 5% on food. It's like, it's an incredible thing. And so, like, and there's a few things that are sort of semi-related to this. The Avengers series is the most expensive thing that human beings have ever created. That's interesting. The other thing is all computational power is pushed forward by the desire to have reality rendered more and more precisely, namely for video games. That is what makes our computers so powerful. It's stories. We're just absolutely desperate to tell stories at all times. And I'm like, sort of like, I'm motivated by this idea because we all sit around and like, here's a tangential thing, but I think you'll help me make this connection. I'm still working on it, but people like Leonardo DiCaprio feel the urge to become like crappy politicians because they can't really make sense of why what they're doing is so valuable. Because he, and I'm just using him as an example, but it's very difficult to say, like, if you're an engineer, you can point to a bridge and say, I built that bridge. But if you're a storyteller, it is like confusing and hard to understand exactly what you're doing. And so I think these hyper successful people get to a point where they go, is what I'm doing important? And then they drop out of their this magic of what they're doing, of being a player in the archetypal realm, is what I would say. And then they become like a weird, crappy politician. They're not even good at it. And they have like stupid, shallow ideas. I find that to be an interesting phenomenon. And I think it's related to the fact that we have a difficult time expressing what stories do. And you know, I was talking to my brother. My brother has the same urge. My brother works for one of the biggest theaters in the country in Houston. He's a director, and he shows kids like Shakespeare and storytelling, and he's super fun. He makes them. They regularly write him and say that he changed their lives. And we were walking around Houston looking at the Christmas lights, and my brother and I. This is another article that I wrote recently, but my brother was like, "I'm not sure what I'm doing is important." Like, and I'm like, "Are you really?" Like, when we were kids, he would make us put on plays. Like, he was one of the few people I know that's really achieved their potential. Like, that's his career now. And he was like, yeah, I don't think I'm not sure that it's important. Like, I want to maybe, you know, and it's like he has all these like semi-political dreams. And I'm just like, lame. It's so not cool. It's like you're doing something way more important than shallow, poorly understood sort of, you know, if I may, like mostly leftist politics. So I'm writing about that a little bit, and I think there's a lot of room in the education space, and the space is opening up on the internet for new types of stories and stories that I saw a clip recently. You might have seen it on Twitter. It was like this movie where there's like a anti-woke tirade by a character It's like going viral on Twitter right now. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a shift going on. It's like people want to hear stories that remind them of, the inspiration to live, and the what it means to be a good person, and a heroic person, and not necessarily all this guilt that's being passed around in Hollywood. So I think there's incredible opportunity there, and I think it's poorly understood because people have a really hard time pointing out what stories are good for, but we can't help but spend trillions of dollars on it. So yeah,
Well,
pause.
we're innately storytelling. We're innately storytelling creatures. And you and I have talked about this a lot, and this is something that I say very frequently when I'm framing the importance of story and the how people make sense of the world. Like we need stories. It's how we think.
Mm-hmm.
It's the formula through which things make sense to us because we experience the world through a story. And I remember when I was in high school, because I read fiction since like I've been hearing fiction stories for as long as I could breathe, basically. But like my parents read me fiction, I'm pretty sure as a little tiny baby. And for as long as I can remember, I was always immersed in fiction. But I remember um, the summer I was 17 and I worked on a farm. I remember talking to my coworkers in the long days that we'd be out in the field because we were like on a vegetable farm and orchards. So we'd be like out in the trees all day and like out in the carrot bed all day. And we'd be talking about things. And I remember watching the stories of my coworkers unfold over the summer. Like they all had these little dramas going on in their lives. And I remember hearing the plot expand. And I remember it was like 2/3 of the way through the summer, I had this oh my gosh moment where I was like, wait a second, this is unfolding exactly like a novel. Like there's these callbacks and there was this foreshadowing that this was going to happen. And then there's this like whole, like these two plot threads, like actually are intertwining perfectly at the end. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm living a novel. This is crazy. But like, that's how we make sense of the world. We have these structures for a reason and we're so drawn to it for a reason. And this is something that you and I talk about a lot in the realm of education is how starved kids are for story and
Yes.
how starved kids are for meaning and also and parents too. Like a lot of we've had this overcorrection as test scores have fallen in the US and as like our overall academic performance has stagnated and
Mm-hmm.
started to collapse. There's been this overcompensation towards we need to focus more on data and we need to focus more on like test scores and raw numbers, which just exacerbates the problem. It's just making it worse.
Yeah.
It's like pouring water on an oil fire, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not
It's very frustrating.
it's very frustrating, but like it's making the problem worse because now people have no story whatsoever. It's like we just have to get better grades and that's it.
Mm-mm.
And this is something like I feel like we've had a lot of interesting conversations about this, and we've covered this some in the newsletter too, the importance of story. But I think it's really something that like kids thrive on story, and I think Acton Academy is such a great example of this, where they
Heroes.
have their kids are heroes, and their kids are on a hero's journey, and they have this epic sense of being on a narrative arc. And I think that's so powerful for kids. And I think we forget that in the name of practicality, we throw all of the joy of the heroic adventure right out the window. And in some ways, that's actually the best way for kids to learn.
Well, it really is the only way that you can't conceptualize anything without a framework of a story. People really, really do not understand that. I think by and large, and well, I think they intuitively understand it. You cannot stop them from understanding it. But I think there was a giant push towards this scientific materialism where it's like actually there's just sort of an objective world of objects, and you see the object and you understand it, and it really isn't how it is. You don't see this as like molecules of tin or aluminum or whatever it is. You see it as a drinking thing, and you see it as a drinking thing or something that'll quench your thirst with your limbic system before you see what the object. You see the drinking thing and then infer the object, not the other way around. And that sounds like a technical thing, but I think it was such a blast to my mind to realize that, because that means that everything is a story. Even everything is, in parts, the parts of stories are like tools. The tool, every tool in your life gets you closer to the end of your story. Um, and so that's really how we structure the world in our minds. And it's not a mistake. I think it's life wouldn't life, if you try, you can't get rid of it, but if you try to get rid of it, all you have is sort of the mundane facts and spreadsheets of life. And that is so soul crushing to people. People will not, people will not do amazing things. Um, and in the U.S., it's like, well, we have all these falling test scores, and people aren't doing well technically. We used to, but we're not doing it well technically anymore. But hey, we still invent everything. That's something that no one ever talks about. We invent everything, and so why? And it's because, well, who knows? But I think partly you could say it's because we have this cowboy ethos. It's like we we genuinely believe that we can do things that aren't currently possible. We can go out into a new frontier. Um, that's being demonized as a story. Maybe partly rightly so. Things need to be questioned. I would never say that that's not the case, but it is worth wondering. I spent some time in Germany, and it's like, well, they're very rational, they're very obedient. The social systems work really well. You can walk out of your apartment, get on a train, go exactly where you want to. You don't have to have a car. It's like, it's very like, and if you jaywalk, people say to you in German, "What if a kid sees you?" That's how they're like. Their social rationale is like, don't jaywalk because
Yeah, but what if a kid sees you?
right,
And it's like, think of the power in that too. I have a very
right.
very antithetical
Well,
opinion on that one.
and it's like, it's complicated, but and people, and I think the Americans with their ingrained American attitudes go to the Europe and go to Germany and think, oh, this is a better way of being. Some of them do. People with certain outlooks. But I was like, well, first of all, there's no spirit here, and nothing's invented here. Everything's, they make cars really well, but everything that is invented new is invented in America and gets to Germany 5-10 years later. And it's like, Germany absolutely relies, as it stands, on Americans for their ingenuity, so that their social systems don't collapse. And that, you know, like in America, we sacrifice a little bit. You can. I live in LA, and traffic's a nightmare. But I would rather have my car. I would rather be free to do whatever I want. And there's some externalities to that. And I don't think we should be naive about that. But the point is that I think, to make sure that we're staying on track here, Hannah, I know that we tend to jump all over, that there's a story that unites the American ethos, that even despite our technical failures, we still believe in that story on some level. And it's still making us do things that other places can't. And I think that that's worth noting.
Yeah, and I think to bring this back very explicitly to education, I think there's two pieces of this story thing that are so important. One is making sure that kids have a sense of story,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a sense of story both in their own lives, like, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What am I dreaming of? What do I want to accomplish? What excites me? How does that fit into the broader picture of this world that I'm living in? Like, those types of stories are really important inquiries for kids to explore. It's part of the becoming process that kids are doing over the course of their childhoods, where they are asking those questions and they are making a story of the world and making sense of how they fit into it. But there's a lot of room to bring a lot more of that storytelling very explicitly into the actual education of a child, which we can talk about some, I think, because I think there's, like, regardless of what schooling modality you choose for your kid, that's 100% something that as a parent you can play a really active role in encouraging and inspiring, and we should talk about that some. But there's also this much more meta topic of exploring the story of school as a whole.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, the story of, where did school come from and how did we get this way and what is it now and where are we going? Like, this narrative arc is something that's really lacking in a lot of ways, which you and I have talked about this before. This is a big part of why we're doing what we're doing, is because there's not a lot of this happening, this conversation around why do we have the schools that we do? and what were they created for, and where have they excelled along the way, but also where have they fallen down and had to pick themselves back up, or the system, like the way we do education has had to pick itself back up. And I think that's really important too. And I think I'm curious to hear you. I don't have a specific question, but I'm curious to hear you riff on this a little bit, because I know that you spend a lot of time thinking about this. You and I both do. But like the story of education as a entity, as a thing, like there's a sore lack of intentional storytelling there too.
Yes, yes. And I think, where school has really succeeded is where it has emulated the ancient Greeks. Um, and I think you can see this in schools that have worked for, I don't know how long. I'm not a historian. But places where they learn about their cultural canon, and to the point where a lot of them are, they learn Greek and they learn Latin, and they learn to read the greats of their culture in the native language. And it is something that actually people enjoy, because it contextualizes you in the place of a story. We're in the story of the West, and you are the newest incarnate. I'm actually giving myself chills just thinking about this. You're the newest incarnation of the West's hero, and all of history rests on your shoulders. And that is not just sort of, that's a story that's been crafted for thousands of years. And it's not just a story or a myth, which is so funny that in our modern sensibilities, we say the word story and myth are also synonyms for lies, which is just absolutely bananas. Because myths are, we can conceptualize it like this: myths are stories that have lasted the test of time, and they stick with us. So the story of Cain and Abel, for example, it can be told in 2 paragraphs, and everyone on the planet just about knows that story. And it's not an accident. It's because it is so crafted to our, almost to our brain structure, our DNA, that you get it and you never forget it. The same with the Adam and Eve story and most of the stories in the Bible, and all of the great works of literature since then, that stick with us. And we use all those metaphors all the time. Those are myths, and they represent sort of this is how I wrote about this recently, but they're the physics of meaning. And the longer that they've lasted, the more likely they are to be true. And this is our Darwinian sort of argument. According, like Darwin, when we look at evolutionary structures, the longer something has lasted over an evolutionary period of time, the more real it is, or the more concrete it is. So like social hierarchies have existed for a very, very, like, millions, maybe billions of years. I don't know about billions, but at least millions. And so they're very, very real, according to a Darwinian. And the same thing is true for stories that last. They're very real, and real in the sense that they don't just stick with you. People play them out all the time. There's a Cain and an Abel in each of us. And we are constantly battling for who gets dominion over our soul. And this is story, metaphorical language, but it is so precise to our experience that it might as well be true. Or it might as well be true in the sense that, we're confused because we say things like, "Oh, there's cortisol in my brain," or that released a bunch of oxytocin or something like that. And we use scientific language like that, as if we're being more precise. But it is just as made up as saying I'm playing out a myth. It's so crazy. Cortisol is the key to a house, but it's not the house, right? When you experience cortisol, it's because you're aware, your limbic system is aware that you're playing out something that could be dangerous to you. It's not the chemical that is real. It is also the sort of landscape, the symbolic landscape. Let me make it a little bit more concrete. If you get a letter from Harvard and you're going to open it, and you don't know if you got in or you didn't, you're going to be flooded with so many chemicals that are going to make your hands are going to shake. You might even faint, because it's not just a piece of paper. It's not just the material. It's a portal to another world. It's a mythological portal. And that's just real. That's true. I don't know, we have this weird conception of world as material, and it's really not how we experience the world. So anyway, all of that to say, kids need to understand their place in the landscape of myth. And there's no escaping it. We have been in a myth since before the Bible was written. And that myth has been reiterated and reiterated and reiterated, and the parts that are really important have stuck. And we study those parts. And we study them for a reason. And it makes kids happier. It puts them in a place where they know what to do next. It puts them in a landscape where they say, my culture is depending on me. And that's such an exciting and wonderful story to be a part of. And everybody loves that. But we've torn it apart because it's not inclusive or something like that. We've sacrificed that story for the story for the story of guilt. We've sacrificed our collective history over thousands of years at the altar of guilt.
Or practicality too. It's not always as insidious as guilt, but it's also, not to derail your train of thought, but I think it's also like, I think what you're saying also applies to the whole, like, well, we just got to focus on the numbers and we just got to focus on the outcomes without any bearing whatsoever on the story and the sense of place in story that is required to motivate anyone to even care about those things in the first place. Like, I think one of the things that makes like a Montessori approach to like elementary education so interesting is the emphasis that it places on creativity and imagination and play and exploration, which allows this natural storytelling gene in kids to thrive, because kids are natural storytellers. Like
They're great at it.
you watch like a 4-year-old, they're in the middle, like, whatever it is, they're totally engrossed in something. Like I saw a video the other day, I think one of my friends sent it to me, of this like little kid, probably 3 or 4, and she's playing on a treadmill and she keeps like standing on it and then like sliding off. She just like rides it to the end, and then she gets the cat involved too, and like she and the cat are like playing together on the treadmill. And like there's 100% some kind of little like, like you could see like she's talking to herself and she's talking to the cat, like she's clearly engrossed in something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a 4-year-old level of narrative, so it's not like, a very complex three act drama going on probably, but like she was deep immersed in like the story element. And I remember this when I was a kid. I remember like I'd be out on a walk and I'd be like, I wouldn't be out on a walk, I'd be like on my way to go like find the dragon that was tormenting my people in my kingdom. Like I was always in the middle of something. And when you let kids do that, this natural storytelling spark doesn't die. And instead it expands in the way that it was intended to expand. Like we're naturally wired to be story creatures for a reason too. Like to go back to your Darwinian point, like there's a reason why this has survived too. Like it's good for us to be storytelling creatures.
Yes.
Like we need to be,
because
just killing it in ourselves.
Well, if the world is nothing but ones and zeros, it would be just as good as if we weren't here. And so there needs to be sort of a grand adventure, a battle between good and evil. And we care about that. And to the extent which it's true, it's like, to me, it's metaphysically true. But somebody doesn't even have to believe that. Somebody can just be like, this is just how we're structured. But I mean, even that is sort of a step outside of the story. You're trying to like be above the story of your life. And, fair enough. That's how science works. And science has done incredible things. And I think science is the exercise of excluding all else. It's the exercise. So myth is sort of a right brain technique. It's the exercise of including everything, the context of your story. And science is a left brain technique, and it's the exercise of getting rid of all variables. And focusing on one thing and seeing how it acts when you do one thing. And the exercise of science has been incredible for what our wealth, I would say mostly our wealth. It's made us, it's an extraordinary tool that has made us very wealthy. But it is not a meaning maker, as it's the Hume problem. It's Hume recognized his Scottish philosopher from, back when, I don't remember the century, but he said that you can't.
I want to say 1700s,
Yeah,
but don't quote me on
that
that.
was my instinct as well.
I don't remember. It's been a while.
Yeah. He said you can't derive an ought from an is, which is just a beautiful little tidbit. You can't figure out what to do based off of what exists. You can't pull meaning from science, is basically all he's saying. So we need myths, despite the power of science. And people like Sam Harris try to derive meaning or morals or values from science, but it's just a silly wild goose chase. Can't be done. So yeah, I think it's fun to be a part of a myth, and kids automatically do it. They love it. When I was a kid, I remember running around the woods with my nephew, who was only 3 years younger than me. And we actually would cut down trees with machetes, which is highly not advised because they were dull machetes that took forever. You know how kids are. It's
Do you both all still have all of your limbs?
Yeah. We're still fully limbed.
Just checking.
But we would cut down entire trees with machetes, and we'd make log cabins out of them, which was fun. But I would make my nephew play out these stories that I was just, when you're that age, you're just so imaginative. And it was the story that we were playing out was that God had been broken into pieces by the devil, and that we had to sort of find the pieces that were scattered throughout the forest. And that's cool, I think.
That's the most you childhood recollection I have ever heard. I'm actually impressed by that, but I shouldn't be. Like, that is, if someone had asked me to describe what did Taylor do when he was a child, I don't think I could come up with anything better.
Yeah. I feel that. It's so funny that I really kind of get a kick out of being recognized for things like that. I went to my friend's birthday party, and somebody asked my friend to do an impression of me, and he was like, Apollo. Like, he just like mentioned a god.
He just started like spouting Greek gibberish. Yeah. He was like, Apollo and Odysseus and the wine dark sea and the
oh, that's good.
Plato. And
yeah, that tickles me. But I think it's interesting from that when we're young, we intuit these things that are so they come from our collective unconscious, and they're so deep. Like, kids have dreams, and if you ask them, if you have a interest in psychology and you know how to ask the right questions, you can sort of you can get the kid to kind of recount their dream for you. And they're so deep. They're like incredibly deep archetypal dreams that kids just have all the time. It really just, I don't know what to make of it. It interests me to no end. And so I think that spills over into the education thing, because I think we're screwing up education so bad that it's really unbelievable. Because really, like, this is something that I mentioned last night when I did that interview, but it was like, it's at the point where if we just left kids alone and didn't even educate them, we would not be screwing up as bad as we are now. And so the bar is low. And I think that points to an incredible opportunity for innovators. I mean, an obvious incredible opportunity, because the highest leverage point we have in the world is the creativity and ingenuity of our young people. And so if we just simply stopped smashing it out of them at an incredible rate, we would be so much better off. It's hard to imagine, but so I'm passionate about that. And I think a storytelling perspective is as good as any to get in.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this extensively before, the level of potential that is left on the table by the fact that we're We're robbing kids of their sense of curiosity. We're robbing them of their innate joy of learning. We're absolutely smothering their sense of agency
Mm-hmm.
and self-direction. And we're
All in the
never
name
giving
of
them a chance to
compassion.
really cultivate their exactly. And conformity too, to some extent, for those who are open enough to be explicit about it. But yeah, it's we're taking away their ability to have any innate sense of purpose too, which is something that I think is one of the things that excites me the most when I hear people talking about an innovative school that they're building, and they talk about the purpose element. Like Alpha School in Texas is a great example of this. They have such an emphasis on teaching kids, helping kids develop their sense of passion and purpose. And I've talked to the people at Alpha extensively about this, about how important it is to really cultivate the purpose element and to help kids develop, like, I figure out what it is they're passionate about, because kids are naturally passionate about things.
I just want to
And we
interject that and I hate
yeah.
to interrupt, but I was struck by this observation that we're called rebelEducator, and it's this
Mhm.
counterculture thing, but it's sort of rooted in of not very counterculture things. It's like a cultural
Yes.
movement. It's I find that funny. It's that the
Yeah.
rebels are the
Well,
ones that are like Socrates. It's like
yeah, but I mean, but it is rebellious at this point in time, but it's so fundamentally important. Like kids, I think we have a really hard time with
mm-hmm.
passion because, and I think parents have a really hard time with passion because they're too caught up in practicality, which is, there's this like passion. People think that there's this passion to practicality continuum, or like, and you're somewhere on the spectrum between the two. And it's really much more of like a Venn diagram where it's like your kid is passionate about certain things. There are things that they are really excited about. And then there are also things that the world will pay them for and will give them opportunities for. And instead of seeing their passion over here and their practicality over here and trying to like nudge them further along the spectrum, you have to look at these two things and see how they fit together. I mean, I feel like there's a newsletter
I
in
was just
this. I
about to
feel
say,
like we need
I
to
think we should get on Canva and make some visualization tools and say
make,
it's like it's not a spectrum, it's two Venn diagrams, because that's excellent.
we totally should. I feel like by the time this episode gets released, this may will have already been. If you saw that viral tweet that we did, this is where this was.
Yeah,
The idea was birthed. We do this like every week,
yeah.
but we don't always record it. But we should. Um, but anyway, like there's this like, and this is something that your background with Praxis, my background with Praxis, like we've both been thinking along these terms for a really
A
long
long time.
time. But the like, you have to figure out how can I be valuable to the world? What will the world pay me for? Because like practically speaking, most people as adults, that's kind of a core element to surviving and thriving in adulthood, is like you have to get paid for something. But it doesn't have to be this drudgery thing where like I went and got an accounting degree because it was practical, and like so I sit in a desk, a cubicle, crunching numbers all day, but I hate my life. Like you can find the things that you really care about and then see like, well, how can this be useful to someone else? And I think there's a lot of very inobvious ways to the untrained eye that a kid's passions can be practical. I just recorded an episode, which will have been released prior to this probably, with the head of school at Alpha, and he was talking about a student that they have there who his big project in high school is he's building a mountain bike park in Austin
Nice.
because he loves the mountain bike and there's no good mountain bike parks, and his like 10-year vision is to build the best mountain bike park in the world, and he wants to go build multiple all over the country, but he's starting in Austin. And this kid had to go figure out like, how do I raise money for this? How do I find a place for this? How do I get volunteers involved who want to help me build it? How do I learn about like all of the like soil composition that I need to know
So
to go
cool.
build this thing? And
Wait, that was David Perel, wasn't it?
all of this, no,
David Perel went into
this is a he did mountain biking
he went
too.
and talked to a school, and a kid was like, I think it was dirt bikes, and then and
Oh no, if David went and talked, it would have been because David knows the people at Alpha too. It probably was, but no, so this kid, like, he has a passion that is like in a very inobvious way is going to be useful to a bunch of people, because now other kids who love to bike in Austin can go
Oh,
to
that's
his
so
park
cool.
once it launches. But like it's the kind of thing that parents would so easily, and culture, society would so easily crush, because you can't design a mountain bike park on one of these color coded career discovery handouts that you get at the guidance counselor's office once a year. Like there's no way to customize the system to that level at the
Well,
scale that we're running.
by the time you make a path for it, it's too late. By the time you
Yeah.
make an algorithm for it, um, uh, anybody can do it. A robot can do it. It's no longer useful.
Yeah. And I think on a very high level, like and then this is a very abstract, big sweeping thing to be optimizing for, but like you have to be trying to build education systems that optimize for like the largest amount of spontaneity and creativity possible, which is part of why I'm also so excited about like micro schools and things like that, where you have, and everybody defines micro schools differently. Some people are like, it's like 6 kids, and other people are like, it's 160 kids, but it's a micro school because it's smaller than public school. Like, it's a really broad range. But these smaller schools where you can have a smaller teacher student ratio and you can have more hands-on nurturing and customization around a student's individual goals, I think that's really important. But I think like most parents see a kid who's obsessed with mountain bikes, and it's like, yeah, but what are you going to do for a living? Like, you're probably not going to be mountain bikes don't go to the Olympics, right? What's the version of the like extreme sports? It's on
The X
like
Games.
ESPN or whatever. They have the Mount X
It's in
Games. That's
Austin.
it. Thank you. Um, I should know this, I
Yeah.
guess. But like you have the like my kid's probably not going to go to the X Games, so like I should get them interested in something that's actually practical kind of vibe, instead of saying, well, like,
Boo.
what are all the creative things? Exactly. What are all the things like your kid could start an e-commerce brand that sells like caters to mountain bikers. They could build a park like this kid's doing. They could start like an extreme sports YouTube channel where they're like interviewing a bunch of these. Like they could be the podcaster of the mountain bike world. I don't know if that niche has been filled yet, but like there's a job that you can do, that you can have sponsorships and make a ton of money and do really cool stuff. Like I think people just don't like this nurturing of kids' individual passions is so important, because there's whole worlds that open up that I think are really inobvious to people, because the status quo powers that be are not like, they're not terribly interested in that, because again, like and not like it's I'm not laying blame here. It's just like I could do that too, but I'm not. Like
Careful.
it's it's no, it's like, benefit of the doubt is just very hard to systematize, if nothing else. Like how are you going to do that? You can't scale it, at least not the way we're trying to now.
Right. Well, you can scale stories. I think is the part of this inspiration that actually can scale. But I do think that people passionate about being mentors, being micro schools, or doing and helping kids. I think um, we people are actually passionate about that. People are actually passionate about making a difference in kids' lives, and teachers, uh, God bless them, are really struggling with a sense of meaninglessness because they sense that there's something wrong with the system, and they have trouble reaching kids, and kids are bored, and all of that.
Yeah. I talked to a lot of teachers who are in that boat. There's a
Yeah.
lot of them. There's a lot who aren't too, but there's a lot of them out there who feel exactly what you just described.
So, I sent you this on Twitter, but I just found these statistics that I wanted to share. So there's activities and the relative risk for unhappiness, and this is in 10th graders.
Mm.
So the things that make them the most happy by statistics are sleeping at least 7 hours a night. That's number one. Isn't that
Wow.
wild? And so,
The fact that that has to be on a list. Yes, that's really
yeah, yeah,
sad.
and that's better than
Makes
anything.
me happy too to sleep 7 hours a night.
Hey, you should do it. Speaking of
I
which,
do.
good. I slept 10 last night. It was great. Um,
Oh, I'm so jealous.
I'm so much better. I think if you're like doing creative work, the hours aren't really what's relevant. It's and if you it just doesn't make sense to not be full capacity. Anyway,
Yeah.
also I found it. I'm So, okay, there's a couple thoughts that kind of are associated with that. I'm in the VC space a little bit, and I was watching Shark Tank because there's a VC that I know, and I heard through the grapevine that he gets all of his information from Shark Tank. I was like, that's funny, but I'm gonna go watch it. I'm gonna go watch it because it's a good show and whatever. So I was watching it. I was shocked by the number of people who, when asked, where did you come up with this idea? They said, I had a dream. And an amazing number of people say that. I think it's relevant for a couple of reasons. We're so obsessed with this practicality thing that we forget that like dreaming and free association and kind of getting back into what our story is considered to be sort of impractical wastes of time, or even sleeping, is considered to be impractical. But it's interesting that all of these sort of entrepreneurially, not all of them, but a lot of these entrepreneurial inventions came out through dreaming. Even I would say that most of my writing ideas come when I'm like taking a shower or like spacing out or like just like going to sleep or something like that. I'm like, oh my God, here we go.
Those are the worst ones when you're
I
falling
know. I take out
asleep.
my
Like, wow,
notepad.
that was a nice thought.
One happened the other day for rebelEducator, and let's see what it was. Oh yeah, school tries to philosophize away work. That was actually one that I wrote the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so yeah, I think kids like having the opportunity to play, which is like, it's more like rest than like homework, or it's this, you get to kind of free. So the girl you were talking about, that was just sort of like in this imaginary world, kind of spaced out in her own world, playing on the
Mm-hmm.
doing all this,
Totally.
playing out this story. It's like, leave them alone. Like seriously, leave them alone. Like they do not need to be working or studying or learning the German consonants or anything like that. I think that's interesting. The next thing that leads to the most happiness is sports and exercise. So great, obvious. Teaches you many things also.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one is religious services. So none of these things are like obvious practical uses of time.
Not obvious practical uses of time, and yet the Austin scholar, who's I think you read her newsletter too. She's a high schooler who writes about like parenting advice and education advice for parents from the teens perspective. She had an issue a couple weeks ago about the importance of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And why it was about, like, she was talking about how she was studying for the PSATs and how one of the things that she does is she makes sure that she gets enough sleep every night, because like when you're studying, that's actually when the information is being anchored in your brain, is when you're sleeping. If you're not sleeping enough, you're not retaining information. This is scientifically proven. So non-obvious productive things, all of these things, and I think this is where you're going with this too, but like all of these things, you learn so much character. There's so much character development that happens in sports. Like all of these things are still extraordinarily important, even if they're not the types of things that we've sort of maybe erroneously put at the in the prime spot in our like food pyramid. I use that as a metaphor because like our food pyramid changes all the time. But it's the same kind of idea. We have this education hierarchy that's not necessarily as accurate as people think it is.
Well, and it's also that I have to just constantly wrangle my thoughts. I'm such a divergent thinker. It's a little bit of a handicap. But it's interesting that we try to measure all the different ways to best be, and we keep, it's like, oh, the measured effects of meditation, the measured effects of going to church, the measured effects of watching stories or going to sleep and or playing or sports, and all these things that are sort of mythical and beyond measurement, but we can kind of get the meta effect of it. It's like if you meditate and this meta effect happens where you're like, you can focus or you're less stressed, which is kind of like a silly surface level observation, I think. But I think at a certain point, we have to just go, okay, like you need to follow your intuitions a little bit. Like if you're unsure about something and or maybe you're not sure if to trust somebody or something like that, it's great to look at studies and to sort of get more practical and rational. But there are such depths to how our psyches work that we are not even close to understanding. And one of them being something that you're talking about. It's like children have interests and they are spontaneous and they seem to come from nowhere. And what is that? We have no idea. I mean, when you start thinking about what we don't know, but when those interests, when those kids play and they follow their interest, and when they interact meaningfully with the social world, meaning that they're valuable, which becomes obvious very quickly, and it makes the kid more interested. So it's not like, it's not like you have to, like you said, it's not the sliding scale; it's the Venn diagrams. But the kid, when they get the social reinforcement for what they're doing, they immediately are more interested. And so that's their genius, that feedback loop. And without that exploratory mechanism, which is an evolved mechanism that kids have, where they automatically, it's like this traveling salesman problem. It's like how to get to all these different points on a map the most efficiently without double tracking. And like the computer can't do it. A computer has to guess. A computer has to sort of go like, well, what if it's like this? Was that good? No, it's pretty close. It just does that a million times. Your kid has an evolutionary algorithm in their mind. It's play. It's fun to them. They're having a good time. But part of the benefit of it is it's this sort of like spaghetti on the wall algorithm that helps them calibrate to the world, because there's not your kid in the objective world. Your kid is part of the objective world. And you have to kind of skid your knee and run into walls, and kind of like, you have to kind of calibrate and get balanced. So there's no way to study or prep for the world. You just have to go in the world and do something. And it's unbelievable how long we extend our childhoods these days. Of childhood,
but also we don't.
Yeah, at the same time, and in the worst ways, we've flopped it in the worst ways. Like kids are not innocent for very long, but they never have to they never have to take responsibility until they're 30. Which is a really deadly combination.
It is.
So
it is. I want to jump in on your point really quickly about like kids' interests, because this is a really important key. There's
it's the snitch in Harry Potter. It's the flying snitch in Harry Potter. It's golden, it glints, and it zips around. And the job of the kid, they win the game. They win the game, like the meta game. It's like Harry Potter's playing a separate game than the rest of the kids in the Quidditch. If he catches that snitch, if he follows his interest and catches that, he wins the game of games. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a great metaphor, actually. There's a really great book that I forget if I've mentioned this to you before or not, but you would love it. It's called The Intellectual Lives of Children by Susan Engel. And it's about how kids' intellects develop. And she spends a lot of time talking about how kids' interests are a critical part of this intellectual development. And you'll see it pretty early on with children as they'll start to develop, like as toddlers, they'll start to have thematic things that become consistently interesting to them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of the cliche stuff, like their kids fascinated with dinosaurs or is really interested in trucks. I remember last year I was visiting friends in Mississippi, and I spent the night with them. And in the morning, their 2-year-old son had to go to preschool, and he was really not wanting to go to preschool. And they were like, because I was driving my old 4Runner at the time, and they were like, do you want to go in Hannah's truck? And he immediately was just like, truck. And like, that was it. He was like so happy. He like rode in the truck. He told his teacher when we dropped him, he's like, do you see the truck that I came in? Like, I came in a truck.
That's amazing.
He was a little sad I didn't drive a monster truck.
Could be better.
It was really sweet. But like, he's obsessed with trucks. Like, nobody told him he should be obsessed with trucks. He really likes them. They speak to something in him. Yeah. And like, this is a really natural phenomenon for kids. And sometimes it's not nearly as obvious. Like a kid might be really interested in collecting rocks or something, and there's no clear, obvious pattern necessarily to why a kid is interested in this thing and what purpose it serves on like a specific level. But on a meta level, what's happening is that kids are aggregating information about a specific topic, And then as that information aggregates, they start to synthesize it. So you're a kid, like, this little boy, like he probably has a lot of scattered information about a lot of different things that he's learning in preschool and stuff. But I bet you in a couple of years, he's going to know a lot about trucks.
Yeah.
And if you sit him down and you ask him about trucks, he'll be able to tell you a lot about them. And as that information bank expands, he's going to be able to start synthesizing questions of his own, like connections, but also inquiries where it's like, well, why are all these trucks like this way? And why don't they do this thing? And then like, he's going to start thinking about things that are creative at a level that when you're a little kid and you're just intaking information, you don't know how to do yet. Like it's a critical part of a child's psychological, like mental development. And so I think this is such an important thing for us to have like a great respect towards, because there's so much that's going on that kids are just naturally wired to be developing in, that we don't necessarily give the level of respect that it deserves.
Right. And
I think a lot of us have no idea that it's going on.
So the other thing from Shark Tank that I picked up on,
yes,
was that they'll say the sharks will say, they'll hear the pitch, the technical pitch of what they're being sold, and then they'll say, "Tell us your story. How'd you get into this?" And they will listen to the story, and based off of their intuition, will gauge how much of the entrepreneur's spirit is in the product. We do that automatically. That is so amazing. When I realized this, I couldn't believe it. They're trying to get, like, there's one there's one thing I remember, like when Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm jumping all over, but I swear I'll tie this all together. When Arnold Schwarzenegger would work out, he would say that it was like having sex. And he would, like, I can't say what he would say, but he would like sort of repeat this thing where he was saying, like, when I'm squatting, this is happening. When I'm doing bicep curls, this is happening. A lot of his spirit, the fractious beings that make up, like, there's hunger and there's thirst, and there's all of these personalities. Your brain is a personality generator that make up a human being. And for most people, only the very top level of your personality is involved in what you're doing. And then people go to work, and what do they feel? They're tired. Why? Because they don't have much of their spirit behind what they're doing. That's only the sort of, like, I have to do this, obedience, analytical, like, and that is not very much of your spirit. And this play process with kids is it's like they're doing like this, and they're finding things where a lot of their spirit aligns. It's like trucks kind of make me feel like powerful, and like they kind of, the warrior comes out, and all these different spirits get channeled through trucks. And it fires the kid up. He's kind of aligned with it. And then you can play with it, and you can learn enough if you follow that interest, so that even the social world lines up underneath that spirit. And so that the social world backs what you're doing. This guy knows about trucks. This guy can fix my truck, or whatever it is. This guy knows how to make trucks. They pay. That's what paying is. It's like, if, in the woo-woo sense, it's like, if money is just energy, it's just like the social world is lining up behind your already aligned spirits. And so the people on Shark Tank, their job is to make millions of dollars off of people's inventions and passions. And so they say, "What's your story?" And then they listen. And if they don't sense that a lot of the person's spirit is behind what they're doing, they're out. And if you sit them down and ask them, they're not like me. They're not interested in meth. They couldn't explain why the hell that's the case. But that's what they're doing. And that's amazing. And so if you want to have a life that is fueled and you're not tired all the time, you have to find something that aligns with your spirit. I mean, you can see it in me. Like, I have been interested in this sort of thing since I was little. And a lot of my spirit is tied up in the desire to express this in simpler and simpler ways. And that that's what I do. And it's not that it was hard. It required a lot of work, but I didn't feel it as work. And that's what a lot of people are looking for. It's like, yeah, life is work. It's hard work, but it doesn't mean that you have to only invoke one or two spirits and be tired as you're doing this horrible accounting work that you hate. It's like you can find something that lights you up, and the work will just, it'll be like that. It'll be your heroic mission. And kids like know that intuitively, and confused adults talk them out of it. It's just how it goes. But it really is just a loss for everybody.
What I want to talk a little bit about the practical side of like mechanics of all of this, because we've talked about this a bunch recently. You've written some about it. But I'm curious about your own experience. You are living the kind of life that a lot of people look at and say, well, he's living the dream. Like he lives in LA and he's like working in Hollywood, but also like working in startup land, like working within the VC world. And also he's like a professional full-time writer. Like you're living out multiple dreams. It's very cool. But like you're like four different archetypes of like California success bro. But like what got you there? Like looking back at the education that you had and the things that you learned, what actually like feels like the fundamental things that you got, or the fundamental things that if you were designing an education for somebody who was to end up where you are, what are the elements that are actually important? Because we talk a lot about all the fluff and the riffraff that's like not important in an education, but what is, in your opinion?
Well, like I said, I think if you leave kids alone, you would do better than traditional schools do. And so that's a low bar, but that doesn't mean that there's not value to education. There's enormous value to education.
Can I push on that for a
Yeah.
second? Because that's a very controversial take. That's a very hot take. That
Well, that's true.
that kids are. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I just want to like delve into this for a second because this is too important to skim over. What is the argument for kids being better off being entirely left alone than being in traditional school? Because the easy argument or the easy pushback to this is like, yeah, there are the Cole Summers of the world who will go and like start 5 businesses and be running a ranch and have bought and flipped a house and like have multiple bank accounts and, you know, like, but they're the outliers. They're like the Michael Jordans of the unschooling world. And most kids, if you just leave them alone, are going to be sitting around playing Fortnite all day. Like, and kids need the basics. They need to know math and reading and how to be socialized and how to navigate the world and all these things that school, like people think school has a monopoly on. What is your pushback to that?
Well, I think that the reason kids are addicted to Fortnite is because they're mythologically starved. And I think that they're living out myths in these video games because they don't understand their place in the world. And so it feels better to play out a myth in a video game than to go back to the real world. That's sort of, adults have said, no myths. This is a real world, baby. You got to work hard and get some money. It's like, and kids are like, that sucks. Like, I don't want to do that. And so I think like I think if you sort of illustrate the point, and you don't really have to work hard to do this, but if you illustrate the point that life is these myths, that's where they come from, you know, like Fortnite is a distillation of life, not the other way around, you know, like, that there's, and you can, if you put your kids' vision on the horizon and say, you have this incredible life to live where who knows what will happen to you, and the stakes cannot be higher because one day you will die. And that there's things to do. And you know, I do think it's difficult because we live in a world full of temptations towards addiction. So I think like by leaving kids alone, like I really think you have to have some kind of community. You have to have like probably a religious structure or something like that. It's not like that they can just like have this vacuum, no mythological structure, no community. Like, but I'm saying that if you leave them alone in a sense that let their interest guide them, um, let them find what lights them up on their own and hang out with the people that light them up, and mentor them and guide them towards things that truly interest them, then I think, I mean, then you're back to like an old school way of doing things. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think it is a little bit short-sighted to say, well, you just leave them alone, because for a lot of people, leaving alone means like, I'm busy and tired and I'm going to hand you this iPad because I don't feel like dealing with you. That's obviously no good. And I don't want to evoke that in people's mind when I say leave them alone. But I think the thing that I want to invoke is like, well, when I was left alone, which I'm very thankful for, I played in the woods for 12 hours a day and built a cabin and built a treehouse by myself. And video games are all right. I had video games, but I had a sense that there was real things to be done in the real world. And that was because I was given confidence, because I wasn't, because I was given context for my being. And so I think that I think that there is a way to get a kid addicted to a video game for sure. And I think that it could happen to the best of us. I lost, to not to get too grim, but I lost my brother to addiction. And addiction is something that uniquely afflicts human beings, and it is horrible, and it's no joke. And I think that down to the technical sense, when you're not living out your myth, you're not servicing God, like in whatever way you conceptualize that is addiction. I think anytime you're outside of that, you're in addiction land, because it's this short-term loop of pleasure. So I'm not naive about that, and I'm not being glib about that, but yeah, I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
Well, I don't think that you're wrong that kids are like, when you leave them be, that they have the capacity for absolutely amazing things. I think that, like, my childhood was very much one where my parents, in a relative sense, left me alone. Like, there was plenty of structure and there were plenty of they were very, very involved, but I also spent hours and hours and hours a day playing in the woods and reading novels. And I feel like we would have been good friends. Kids, we would have gotten along very well.
Yes, and in Minnesota, by the way, it's illegal to leave a kid alone until they're 14.
There was a story that broke yesterday or the day before. Lenore Skenazy, I don't know if you've read her work, Free Range Kids. She had an article on Reason about how a mom in Waco had her kid, her 8-year-old son, was like really, I forget what, he was like being really rambunctious or something, and she was driving him home, and she had him walk half a mile back home, and the neighbor called the cops, and the police like picked up the kid and brought the kid home. He was like on his own block by the time the police got there and took him home, and they arrested the mom for like negligence, which is crazy. It's crazy to me to think about how much freedom we used to give kids, and now we're stifling them. But all of that aside, like, when given freedom, kids are capable of really great things. But I think there's a really big difference between coercion and force and requirements versus encouragement and modeling and structure, not in a like enforced way, but in an encouraged way. Like, if you have a kid who is like, if you have a home environment rather, where like you just sit around all day and watch Netflix when you're not working, like, of course your kid is also going to want to sit around and play on their iPad all day and like watch YouTube and whatever. Like, that's just their default. It's what they know. But if you are in a home where you're reading every day and your kid sees that, and you're working on projects every day, you're baking your own bread and you have a garden and you're doing like whatever it is that you're working on, crafting projects in your free time, like, kids model behavior, how they learn, how they imitate what is being modeled to them. And that is how they learn. It's like, it's part of our wiring. So if you're modeling for kids things that you want them to be, like whatever you deem to be virtuous habits and pastimes, it makes it a lot easier for your kid to also do those things. Like, if you leave them alone, but you leave them alone in a house full of books, and you don't have to have a lot of money for this, you can have it be a house full of library books, but you leave them alone in a house full of books, and full of like, those little like engineering and science project kits that they can play with. And you have crafting supplies and you have like Legos and Lincoln
And
logs
it
and things
really
that they can
isn't
use to.
that much of a stretch, because that was my childhood.
Right.
And
Mine too.
and I went to a regular school, but like, you know, it was kind of it was so it was like designed in like the 1800s, so it was like sort of backwards in a good way. And like, I don't know, I just kind of was free to do whatever I wanted, and I was really rebellious, and I would always, even in that circumstance where it was like a lot of freedom, anytime my teacher said anything, I was like, I don't like that. So um, I have a very strong memory of um, uh, on a test, my teacher put a true or false question, and it was DNA is a helix, and I put false because DNA is a double helix, and she marked it wrong, and I said, "Look, this is right because DNA is a double helix," and she said, "Well, everybody else in the class got it right." So that was her answer, and I was like, I was irate, and I could not believe. I've never been so mad in my life. So I raged against the machine, even when the machine was small and pathetic. Um, so, but yeah, I don't think that it's like you have to do this revolutionary new fangled thing. It's something that you and I have been making sure that we write about. Something that we've like realized
Mhm.
that we need to consider is like, you don't have to yank your kid out of traditional school. It's just like, look, like kid, like, you know, to the extent that you want, that you can follow your interest, and if you get crap for it at school, stand up and tell the truth and be willing to face the consequences, because that's what life is like anyway. And if you're like that, people admire you, people follow you, people look up to you. It causes all these great feedback loops no matter where you are. So you don't have to wait till you build Eden to get started, you know, uh, doing alternative education on your kid. You can do it wherever you're at. um, and
Yeah.
I think, you know, there's always going to be corrupt systems around. So it's pointless to sit around and wait for them to go away.
Yeah. And I think that's the important like duality to bear in mind, is that one, you can 100% start doing this on your own time, with your own resources, your own intuitive sense of what your kid needs. Like, trust that, go do it. Any parent, no matter what education systems they have access to or they feel like they are accessible to them, you can 100% be doing these things. But at the same time, it also requires a level of engagement and intentionality and commitment. Like, you can't just,
Right.
just like tell your kid, okay, go, see you at dinner time, without
I think we
groundwork
could
being laid
stand more
first.
of that.
Without, without groundwork being laid first is what I'm getting at. If it's like, if they're just going to spend the whole day on YouTube, no positive structure has been set first.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. I think we're on the same page. Like, I agree that we could 100% stand to see more of that, but
Well, there's
like,
also the issue that
with positive modeling.
there's also the issue that people are having kids later in life, and they're having fewer kids, and they're richer when they have kids. And so kids are they're getting too much attention. They're being taught that they're too special, and they're too protected. And and it's a measurable problem.
I want to bring it back because I totally derailed you after asking my question about your education, and I want to come back there to close this out. You, like, what was useful to you in the path that you've walked in terms of education background and foundation, and what, if you were designing an education for a child that was appeared to be on a trajectory similar to the one that you've been on, what would you, or like going like interested in similar fields and types of work that you've pursued, what would you teach them?
Well, I don't think there's anything more valuable than letting kids figure it out, and not stressing them out about your status and their credentials. So a lot of parents want their kids to have high status because it makes them feel good, and so they push them and push them and push them to be things that they don't want to be. And I would say to parents, understandable. However, it's no good. Kids will find the highest status possible for the most sustainable period of time if they're allowed to find it on their own terms, and they'll surprise you, you know, and in really great ways. My parents, thank God, are hardworking people from the South, and um, their parents before them were desperately poor, and so me just going to college and getting out of the house and whatever was good enough for them. Um, so I was lucky that my parents never were like, when are you gonna go to do this? I just kind of was allowed to. I was allowed to go and do and find whatever I was interested in, and I get to live this amazing eclectic life that I'm so motivated by, that the real potential. I already consider myself successful, but the potential of what I can do is in the next 10 years is limitless, because I have unlimited energy to do what I do, and it's becoming more and more rewarded by my social circles and society. And so, my parents are thrilled, but they never tried to predict it. They never tried to say, like, go to Harvard or do this or do that. They never tried to, whenever I wanted to quit Boy Scouts, they were like, you got to finish out what you promised that you would do, but after that you can do whatever you want. And I think that was amazing. And I wish that every kid had the opportunity to to and it's not that my parents, like, my parents didn't give me any money ever. It's like, you got to figure it out, buddy. But, like, we're not gonna be worried about you or anything like that. It's like, you get nothing from us. My dad's more, like, concerned about me than anybody when I was growing up, and he tried to give me money, but I learned from my brothers. Like, my brother Cheney left college. Left the house at 18 and never took another dime from his parents. He refused, and I admired him, and I was like, I'm going to do the same. And so I thought that was cool, and so I wanted to do that too. And so, yeah, I don't know how to exactly sum that up, but I hope that gives a little bit of a feeling.
No, it definitely does. I have one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's the dream that you're working towards, and in the realm of education specifically, and maybe the role that you want to play in this vision that you're working towards? But, like, when you're clearly fired up about the future of education, you clearly care a lot about Rebel Educator, you care a lot about these innovative schools and programs that are emerging. You spend quite a bit of your time thinking about this and playing an active role in this shift that is occurring. Why is that exciting to you? Like, what do you see in the future that you want to be playing a role building towards?
Well, it's, I write about my newsletter is called The Creativity Gap, and I think there's a gap between what I think that we're not living up to our potential. And I see that all the time with people that are brilliant, but they're, like, working jobs that they don't like, and they're sort of their whole spirit's not behind it. And it's not just that they don't have to do that and they could do something else. It's just a waste for them and for all of us who don't get to experience what they could create. And I think that we only do that because we're afraid. And we get caught in these fear cycles where it's like, well, I can't say what I think to be true because I might lose my job or whatever it is. And I think that what we need to overcome that is a heroic story, because that is the only thing that overcomes fear. And so I think people should feel absolutely fired up about this, and that they should feel that they are the incarnation of their culture's hero, and that the world is absolutely depending on them. And if they don't, every day that they don't show up and give what they have to give to the world is worse. And it actually is really true. And I can't get over that. And I'm just like, I can't believe that's true. I constantly have to sort of pinch myself that that's true. And I I occasionally find myself hypnotized by the idea that the world is meaningless, or that it's just all atoms bouncing around. And then I'm reminded of this grand narrative that we're all taking part in, and I'm like, oh my God. And it's the only thing that can get people to overcome fear and share their gift and their light with the world. So, you know, by God, let's do it.
If people want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where would you send them after this interview?
I don't know.
You can always plug Rebel Educator if you're blanking on anything else.
I got the Substack, which is called the Creativity Gap. It's mine, Taylor Foreman. I have my blog, and then I'm also posting on the Rebel Educator's newsletter, and um, it's really a meaningful thing, and I love to see people that respond to it. I think we're going to grow to great heights, and so I would encourage everyone to go there. You know what? Let's send them all there.
I was
Rebel
joking, but
Educator,
we totally can.
the
I
Rebel
was trying to
Educator.
plug you, but
Well, I mean, you can find me. I'm on Twitter and whatever. I'm just starting on Twitter really, and I'm trying to grow. But um, I think the real passion is the Rebel Educator newsletter. So I mean, and I just
rebeleducator.substack.com, ladies
yep,
and gentlemen.
let's fire it up. Let's get going.
It's always a pleasure, Taylor. I always feel every time we do this, I feel like we could riff for hours, but this was a good time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.